My name is Daniel Blake, and I am 46 years old. My life has been a roller coaster of love, betrayal, and resilience. What I'm about to share is the story of how the people I trusted most abandoned me when I needed them the most, only to come back years later for what they thought they could take. But let's start at the beginning. It all began 3 years ago. I was living a comfortable life with my wife of 18 years, Megan, and our teenage son, Ethan. Megan and I had built a stable life together. I worked as an accountant and we lived in a nice home in the suburbs, fully paid off. Ethan was excelling in school, and I felt proud of the life we had created. But that peace shattered the day I went to the doctor for what I thought was a routine checkup. I had been feeling unusually tired for weeks, but I had chalked it up to stress from work. Instead, I received the news that would change everything. I had stage 3 liver cancer. The doctor explained that the road ahead would be tough: chemotherapy, potential surgery, and months of recovery. My chances of survival were not great, but there was hope if I started treatment immediately. As I sat there in shock, the only thing I could think about was how I would break the news to Megan and Ethan. That evening, I gathered them in the living room. Megan was flipping through a magazine, and Ethan was engrossed in a video game. Clearing my throat, I said, "I need to talk to you both about something serious." Megan immediately put down her magazine, concern etched on her face. Ethan paused his game, looking at me expectantly. "I've been diagnosed with liver cancer," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's serious, but the doctors say there's a chance if I start treatment right away." For a moment there was silence. Megan's eyes welled up with tears, and she reached for my hand. "We'll get through this, Daniel," she said softly. Ethan, on the other hand, looked stunned. He nodded but didn't say much. At that moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. I believed that, no matter how hard this journey would be, my family would be my strength. The first round of chemotherapy was brutal. It drained every ounce of energy from my body. I could barely eat, walk, or even get out of bed. Megan took time off work to care for me, and Ethan helped around the house. At first, they were incredibly supportive, ensuring I had everything I needed. Megan prepared meals, drove me to my appointments, and stayed by my side through the worst of it. Ethan even stepped up by mowing the lawn and running errands, things I usually handled. But as the weeks turned into months, the cracks began to show. One morning, after a particularly rough night, I asked Megan to help me get dressed for an appointment. She sighed loudly, as if the request was an inconvenience. "Can't you manage on your own today, Daniel?" she asked, not even looking up from her phone. I was too weak to argue, so I struggled to dress myself. By the time I made it to the car, my hands were trembling, and I felt like I'd run a marathon. Megan drove in silence, her expression distant. I chalked it up to stress, hoping that things would improve. But deep down, I knew something had changed. Ethan, too, began pulling away. He spent more time at his friend's house, avoiding the heavy atmosphere at home. When I asked him for small favors, like bringing me a glass of water, he would roll his eyes or act as though I was a burden. Then came the day that broke me. I overheard a conversation between Megan and Ethan that shattered my heart. "I can't keep doing this," Megan said, her voice low and tinged with frustration. "He's always so needy. I didn't sign up for this. What are we supposed to do?" Ethan replied, sounding equally exasperated. "It's not like we can just leave." Their words cut deep. I had always provided for them, ensured they never lacked anything. And now, when I needed them the most, they were losing patience. To ease their burden, I decided to hire a home nurse. After consulting with my doctor, I found Linda, a kind and experienced caregiver who specialized in cancer patients. Linda took over many of the responsibilities Megan had been handling, driving me to appointments, preparing meals, and managing my medications. For a while, things seemed to improve. Linda's presence allowed Megan and Ethan to relax and focus on their own lives. But instead of gratitude, I began to sense resentment building in Megan. She started complaining about Linda's presence, saying she felt like a stranger in her own home. "I don't like her being here every day," Megan said one evening, crossing her arms defensively. "She's here to help," I replied, trying to keep my tone calm. "If you want her gone, You'll have to take over her responsibilities. Megan didn't respond. Instead, she stormed upstairs, slamming the door behind her. The breaking point came one afternoon. I had just returned from a chemo session, utterly exhausted. As I walked through the door, I noticed boxes piled in the living room. Megan and Ethan were packing their belongings. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling with confusion and fear. Megan barely glanced at me. "We're leaving," she said flatly. "I can't do this anymore, Daniel. It's too much." I turned to Ethan, desperate for some kind of explanation, but he avoided my gaze. "Sorry, Dad," he mumbled, barely audible. I can't stay here." I stood frozen as they loaded their belongings into the car. As they drove away, I remained on the porch, watching in disbelief, the weight of their betrayal pressing down on me. My body was weak, but my heart felt shattered. I was alone. The days after Megan and Ethan left were some of the darkest of my life. I had thought cancer was my greatest battle, but it turned out that fighting the loneliness and heartbreak of their betrayal was just as grueling. The silence in the house was deafening. Every corner reminded me of the life we had built together, now reduced to an empty shell. At first, I clung to the hope that Megan would call or that Ethan might check in to see how I was doing. But as the days turned into weeks, it became painfully clear that they had no intention of looking back. I spent hours lying in bed, questioning everything. Was it my fault for getting sick? For being too reliant on them? The questions tormented me. Thankfully, Linda continued to be a steady presence in my life. She noticed how withdrawn I had become and did her best to lift my spirits. "Daniel, you've come so far," she said one afternoon while preparing my medication. "You're stronger than you think. Don't let what they did bring you down." Her words were comforting, but they didn't erase the pain. Still, I forced myself to focus on what mattered most: my health. I stuck to my treatment schedule, endured the grueling side effects of chemo, and slowly began to regain some strength. Linda's care was meticulous, and she went above and beyond to ensure I had everything I needed. She even started organizing small things around the house to make it more functional for me. Despite her professionalism, I could see the concern in her eyes. She knew I was struggling emotionally but respected my need for space. A month after Megan and Ethan left, I received a call from my brother, Stephen, who lived in a neighboring state. Stephen had always been the dependable one in our family. When I told him what had happened, his outrage was immediate. "They just left you? Are you serious?" Stephen's voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. "After everything you've done for them?" I sighed, too drained to defend Megan and Ethan's actions. "It's been hard for them too," I said weakly, though I didn't truly believe it. "No, Daniel," Stephen snapped. "This isn't about them. This is about you fighting for your life, and they couldn't even stick around. That's unacceptable." Stephen decided to visit me the following weekend, and when he arrived, it felt like a lifeline. He brought along his wife, Caroline, and their 2 kids. For the first time in weeks, the house felt alive again. Stephen took over where Megan had left off, driving me to appointments and helping with household chores. Caroline cooked meals and made sure I was comfortable. "It's good to see you smiling again," Stephen said one evening as we sat on the porch. "You've been through hell, but you're still here. That says a lot about you, Daniel." Stephen's visit was short but impactful. Before leaving, he offered a long-term solution. His wife's younger sister, Hannah, was going through a difficult divorce and needed a place to stay. Hannah was studying nursing at a university not far from my house, and moving in with me would make things easier for both of us. "She's good people, Daniel," Stephen assured me, "and you'll have someone here in case of emergencies." It's a win-win. Though hesitant at first, I agreed. The house was too big and too empty for just me. Maybe having someone around would help. Hannah moved in a week later. She arrived with only a few suitcases and an air of nervousness. "Thank you so much for letting me stay," she said as we carried her things inside. "I promise I won't get in your way." Her kindness and humility were immediately apparent. Unlike Megan, she never treated me like a burden. She took on small tasks without being asked, running errands, cooking meals, and keeping the house tidy. More importantly, She treated me with genuine respect. As the days went by, Hannah's presence became a comforting constant. We didn't talk much about our struggles, but there was an unspoken understanding between us. She knew I was healing, not just physically but emotionally, and I knew she was trying to rebuild her life after a painful breakup. One evening, over dinner, Hannah shared her story. Her ex-husband had left her for someone else, taking most of their savings with him. She had been forced to rely on scholarships and part-time work to continue her education. Despite everything, she remained optimistic. "Life's not always fair," she said with a small smile. "But I've learned that the only way forward is to focus on what you can control." Her words resonated with me. If Hannah could move forward after everything she'd been through, so could I. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel like myself again. The chemo treatments were working, and my doctor delivered the news I had been praying for. I was officially cancer-free. The moment I rang the bell at the hospital, signaling the end of my treatment, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had survived. When I returned home that day, Hannah had decorated the house with balloons and a banner that read, "Welcome back, fighter." She had even baked a cake to celebrate. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt hope for the future. With my health restored, I decided it was time to make some changes. I filed for divorce from Megan, a step that felt both liberating and bittersweet. I also started planning my next move. The house, once filled with happy memories, now felt like a reminder of the pain I had endured. I decided to sell it and start fresh. But before putting it on the market, I made an important decision. I would transfer ownership to Hannah. She had been my rock during the most difficult time of my life, and I wanted to give her a chance to rebuild her own life. When I told her, she was stunned. "Daniel, I can't accept this," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "You've earned it," I replied. "This house doesn't feel like home to me anymore, but I know you'll take good care of it." With that, I began the next chapter of my life. I moved to a quiet place in the countryside, far from the memories of betrayal and pain. My new home was modest compared to my old one, but it suited me perfectly. The air was crisp, the days were peaceful, and I finally had the solitude I needed to reflect on everything I had endured. I spent my mornings sipping coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise, and my afternoons tinkering with small woodworking projects. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. I was in control of my own life again. A few weeks after settling in, I received a phone call from Hannah. She had been living in the house I gave her and was thriving. She told me how she had started turning the place into her own home, adding small touches like painting the walls and planting flowers in the garden. "You really saved me, Daniel," she said. "I don't know where I'd be if you hadn't let me stay." Her gratitude warmed my heart. Giving her the house had been the right decision. It no longer felt like a reminder of what I had lost. Instead, it had become a place of new beginnings for someone who truly deserved it. As time went on, I built a small but meaningful life in the countryside. My neighbors were kind and welcoming, and I quickly became friends with Edith, an older woman who lived across the street. She was a widow, and like me, she had endured her share of hardships. Over cups of coffee on her porch, we shared our stories and found solace in each other's company. One afternoon, Edith mentioned something that caught me off guard. "There were 2 women asking about you a couple of weeks ago," she said, her brow furrowed. "They came by your old house and spoke to Hannah. She told them you'd moved but didn't give them your address." I felt my stomach drop. "What did they look like?" Edith described them, and I immediately knew it was Megan and Ethan. A mix of anger and unease coursed through me. Why were they looking for me after all this time? What could they possibly want? Later that evening, I called Hannah to ask about the encounter. She confirmed that Megan and Ethan had shown up unannounced. "They were asking a lot of questions about you," Hannah said. "They seemed surprised when I told them the house was mine now." "What did you tell them?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just said you'd moved and didn't leave any forwarding address. I didn't give them any details." I thanked Hannah for keeping my privacy intact, but their sudden reappearance left me deeply unsettled. I couldn't help but wonder what their intentions were. A few days later, my question was answered. I was sitting in my home office, working on some freelance accounting projects, when I heard a knock at the door. Checking the security camera, I saw Megan and Ethan standing on my porch. I froze. Part of me wanted to ignore them, to let them think I wasn't home. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt and betrayed, wanted answers. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. There they were. Megan looked almost the same as I remembered, though there was a hint of desperation in her eyes. Ethan had grown taller, but his expression was blank, almost sheepish. "Daniel," Megan began, her voice wavering. "We need to talk." "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my tone cold and distant. She hesitated, then said, "We've been through a lot since we left. Things haven't been easy." "Not my problem," I replied bluntly. "You made your choice when you walked out that door." Ethan stepped forward, his voice quieter. "Dad, we're sorry. We didn't mean to hurt you. It's just... everything was so overwhelming back then." I stared at him, searching for sincerity in his words. "You think saying sorry erases what you did? Do you have any idea what it was like to be abandoned by my own family while I was fighting for my life?" Megan's face crumpled. "Daniel, please. We've lost everything. My mother passed away, and the house we were staying in wasn't even hers. We've been living in motels. We don't have anywhere else to go." Her words should have softened me, but instead, they ignited my anger. "So now you come back? Not to check on me or see how I'm doing, but because you need something? You didn't care when I was sick and dying, but now that you're struggling, you want my help." "It's not like that," she insisted, her tone pleading. "We've changed. We just want a chance to make things right." I shook my head, the bitterness rising in my chest. "You had your chance, and you threw it away." The conversation escalated from there. Megan accused me of being selfish, of turning my back on my family. I reminded her that she was the one who had abandoned me first. Ethan stood silently, clearly uncomfortable with the argument, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. Finally, I ended it. "This is my home now. You're not welcome here. If you don't leave, I'll call the police." Megan's expression shifted from pleading to furious. "You'll regret this, Daniel," she spat, her voice filled with venom, before storming off. Ethan trailed after her without saying another word. After they left, I sat in silence, processing what had just happened. A part of me felt vindicated for standing my ground, but another part of me felt a twinge of sadness. Despite everything, they had been my family once. Letting go completely was harder than I thought. A week later, I received a call from the local sheriff. Megan and Ethan had been caught trying to break into Hannah's house. They were arrested and charged with attempted burglary. When the sheriff asked if I wanted to press charges, I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said firmly. "They need to understand that actions have consequences." As I hung up the phone, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking back. My life was finally my own, free from the shadows of the past.